Welcome to Configuring GIT Submodules. Hello, I'm Bob Jones, and today I'm going to walk you through using the GIT Source Control Management solution to manage submodules. What's a submodule? Well, let me give it to you by example. I develop WordPress websites and WordPress plugins. And a plugin in WordPress is simply a collection of code that performs a certain piece of functionality. And you can use plugins in a lot of different places. So I've found myself using the same plugins across multiple websites. I'd make a little bit of a fix or an enhancement to the plugin while I'm working on site 1, and then I'd go to site 2 and make some changes to the plugin, and the two plugins would start to drift. The code would start to drift, and I couldn't remember which change I'd made to which version. So I finally realized it's time to bite the bullet. And I've been a software developer for a very long time, and I know what source control is, and it's not my purpose in this video to educate you on what a source control solution is. You're going to have to go do some research on that and then come back to this video later. Purpose of this is to show you how to use a very complicated, very complex feature of GIT called submodules. And what I'm going to try and do is make it clean, clear, and simple with some clear examples. I'm going to stop frequently to show you code and show you what happens after each step in the process. So let's get started. So here's our challenge. We have two sites, site 1 and site 2, that each consume one or more of the modules over in our modules folder. We want to be able to modify any copy of alpha text or beta text or gamma text and have all of those copies synchronized in such a way that the changes we might make while we're working on site 1 show up in the modules folder and they show up in site 2. And we want to be able to do this mindfully so that we don't want to populate the changes to site 2 necessarily until we're absolutely ready to do so. How do we do that? That's our challenge. You're going to need 3 tools to manage your source code using GIT. The first one is GIT, second one is source tree, third one is Bitbucket. Let's take a look at each of these. GIT adds a context menu to your Windows Explorer, as shown here on the right. There's a lot more in my context menu than just GIT, but you can see like Git clone and Git repository are sort of the core GIT tools. Second tool is source tree, which manages code versions, and it's a tool that allows you to check code in, push it back to your repository, pull it down from your repository. We'll show you that during the demos. The third tool is Bitbucket. And Bitbucket is an off-site private code repository. You may not use Bitbucket, you may choose something else. I've made the assumption that you want to develop proprietary code. If you are developing open source code that you're willing to share with the world, probably the best place is GitHub itself. Bitbucket is good for small developers like me, teams of 1, 2, 3, up to 5 folks, and it's free. To download these, here are the sites you can go to download them, and we can pause. You can pause the video while you go download these and come back and continue. For the purpose of this demo, I've created a root folder called Git Test, and within it I've put 2 folders. The first one is modules, and these represent the modules, the plugins, the code that you want to share across multiple projects. I've called the 3 modules we're going to use here alpha, beta, and gamma, and the first one contains simply a file that all it has is 1 line of text that says version 1.0. I go to gamma or beta, I get the same thing, beta.txt and so on. Now, the other folder is called sites, and this represents the websites I'm trying to develop. Within the website, I have a single file called root.txt, and site root version 1. I also have a file called git ignore. I'll come back to that in a moment, and a folder called modules. Under site 1, I've pre-created an empty module folder called alpha and an empty module folder called beta. And these represent the folders that are the modules or plugins I'm going to use. For site 2, same structure, again, site root.txt, site 2 version 1, and modules, and in this case it's going to be alpha and gamma instead of alpha and beta. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to create Git repositories for each of these pieces. So to start with, I simply right-click on the folder that I want to create a Git repository in, and since I want to create a repository for the whole site, I want to manage the whole site in Git, I create a repository right here. And what Git will come up with is it'll pop out a simple little question. Do you want to make it, you want to create a folder? So I've created that, and now Git will put an icon on the folder that tells me this is now Git managed. Do the same thing here for site 2, create the repository, and say yes, and we're in business. Now, I want to show you a little bit here about this git ignore file. Sometimes I don't want to have everything under source control. So I have here a file I've created called git ignore, and it says don't include anything in the modules folder. That's the not modules, and track the site root.txt file. All right, so this is the same Git modules folder I've created for both sites, and you can go out and research Git modules or Git ignore files. That's beyond scope of this for right now. Leave it to say that the purpose here is that I am not going to include the modules folder contents inside the site configuration for this site, for site 1, and the same is going to be true for site 2. All right, and so that's basically it. Notice that these folders themselves do not have an icon on them, so it says they're not captured, they're not managed by Git. Let's go back over to the modules folders now, and each of these modules again has a simple little file in it that contains just the text that we're going to use to track our changes. So I'm going to create a repository for each of these. Again, right click, say I want to create the repository, and it's done. I do the same thing for the others, and here we go. So we now have repositories created for alpha, beta, and gamma, and for each of the sites. So now that we've created site 1, site 2, and our module folders, the question is, how do we plug all this together? In fact, here's the challenge. How do we synchronize all the copies of each module so that a change to the code in one location appears in all other locations? That's what we need to look at next. So let's introduce the term submodules. Notice that when we created site 1 and site 2, the alpha and beta folders were empty. And what we need in order for the sites to work is we need for them to have the appropriate content. So what we're going to do is import that content from the modules folder. And we want to do that in a way that keeps everything in sync. And here's how. The modules folder is the master copy. All instances of alpha and beta and gamma are derived from the master copy. But how do we get those things synchronized? This is where it gets complicated, all right? So enter Bitbucket. Bitbucket serves as the surrogate home for each module, each submodule. So what we do is we create a repository in Bitbucket for each of the modules that we're going to work with. And then we point each module in the modules folder, we point that to its corresponding Bitbucket repository. Here's the way it plays out. When we've got that all hooked up, all we have to do is push updates from wherever we have the folders to the Bitbucket repository, and then pull updates back down from the Bitbucket repository. So we don't directly update if I make a change in Site 2, alpha in Site 2, I don't go up and update the modules folder. I check the updates in, I push them up to Bitbucket, and then I go over to modules and pull them down from there. So let's walk through an example. Let's say alpha.txt has changed in Site 1. All right. So we commit the changes, and then we push that change up to the alpha repository in Bitbucket, and then we pull it from there down to the modules folder in our modules collection, and if we need to, we pull it down to Site 2. So now everybody's in sync. So this is the end of part 1. We've gone through the concepts. In part 2, we'll actually take it into the code. We'll build the repositories and hook them all up and see how we can actually change and push and pull and make it all happen.